In the year 1E700, during the Battle of Red Mountain, every Dwemer on Nirn vanished in a single instant. Not over days, not across battlefields. Every member of an entire civilization, warriors in the tunnels beneath Vardenfell, craftsmen in the workshops of Bethardams, scholars in the libraries of Arkanthams, ceased to exist in the same heartbeat. The ash settled over empty armor. The forges cooled with no hands to tend them. And in the deepest chamber of Red Mountain, Kagrenac, chief tonal architect of the Dwemer, stood alone before the Heart of Lorkhan, with 3 brass tools still humming in his hands. The common story calls it an accident, a miscalculation, a desperate gambit by a cornered architect as Nerevar's forces breached the final defenses. The story says Kagrenac struck the heart in panic, that the tonal architecture he'd spent decades perfecting failed under pressure, that the disappearance was the price of hubris meeting haste. The evidence tells a different story. In the Corpusarium beneath Tel Fir, centuries after the event, a bloated, disease-ravaged Dwemer named Yagrum Bagan sits in the darkness. He is the last of his kind, not because he escaped, not because he hid, but because he was in an outer realm when it happened, beyond the reach of whatever Kagrenac unleashed. When asked what became of his people, Yagrum's answer is simple. I have no idea what happened. I was not there to observe. I was in an outer realm at the time, and when I came back, my people were gone. His survival is the first clue. If the disappearance were an accident, a catastrophic failure of tonal architecture, it should have been localized, centered on Red Mountain, radiating outward, weakening with distance. But the Dwemer in Skyrim's ruins vanished just as completely as those in Morrowind. The Dwemer in Hammerfell, in High Rock, in every corner of Tamriel, gone, simultaneously, universally, as if the event were not a blast, but a calling, as if it required not proximity, but connection. Yagrum was disconnected. He was outside the system, and so he remained. The second clue lies in the tools themselves. Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard were not improvised weapons. They were masterworks of Dwemer craftsmanship, each one a precision instrument designed for a specific function within Kagrenac's grand metaphysical experiment. Keening, the blade that cuts the tones of existence. Sunder, the hammer that strikes the heart's rhythm. Wraithguard, the gauntlet that shields the wielder from the unmaking inherent in touching divinity. These were not the tools of desperation. They were the tools of proof. Kagrenac had been working on the Numidium project for decades. The brass god, the Numidium, the walking star, a construct designed to be a god without the dream, a divinity built from logic and refusal rather than myth and worship. The Heart of Lorkhan was to be its power source, its animating principle. But more than that, it was to be the proof of the Dwemer's central philosophical claim, that the gods were not authorities but mechanisms, that divinity was a function of the orbis rather than its foundation, and that consciousness, Dwemer consciousness, could sever itself from the dream and achieve a higher state of existence. The Chimer, led by Nerevar and guided by the Tribunal and the 3 good Daedra, believed the opposite. They believed the gods were real, that Azura's prophecy was true, that the heart was sacred and should not be touched. The war beneath Red Mountain was not just a territorial conflict. It was a theological debate with swords and sorcery as punctuation. And Kagrenac would rather erase his entire species than lose that debate. This is the thesis. The Dwemer disappearance was not an accident. It was the logical conclusion of a civilization that valued being metaphysically correct over existing at all. Kagrenac did not fail. He succeeded. And the price of that success was every Dwemer life on Nirn, including his own. To understand why Kagrenac made that choice, you have to understand what the Dwemer and the Chimer were actually arguing about. The Chimer were a people defined by faith, exiled from the Somerset Isles for following the Daedric princes Boethia, Mephala, and Azura, the 3 good Daedra, as they called them. The Chimer built their culture on prophecy, on the promise that they were chosen. that their suffering had meaning, that the gods watched and cared. When they settled in Morrowind, they found the Dwemer already there, delving deep into the earth, building cities of brass and steam in the bones of the world. The Dwemer were a people defined by refusal. They refused to worship. They refused to accept the gods as anything more than powerful entities subject to the same metaphysical laws as mortals. They studied the Orbis not as a creation to revere, but as a mechanism to understand and eventually to manipulate. Their great work, recorded in texts like Divine Metaphysics, was to prove that divinity was not a state of grace, but a state of being, one that could be achieved or even engineered through sufficient understanding of the underlying tonal structure of reality. For a time, the two cultures coexisted, uneasy, suspicious, but coexisting. The Chimer had their faith, the Dwemer had their forges, and Morrowind was large enough for both. Then the Dwemer found the heart. Beneath Red Mountain, in a chamber carved from volcanic glass and ancient stone, the Heart of Lorkhan still beat. Lorkhan, the trickster god, the missing god, the one who convinced the other Aedra to create Mundus and was destroyed for it. His heart had been ripped out and cast down to Nirn by Auriel's bow. And there it remained, pulsing with divine power, a fragment of a dead god that refused to stop. To the Chimer, the heart was sacred, a relic of the god who gave them mortality, who made the world possible. To touch it was blasphemy. To the Dwemer, the heart was proof. Proof that gods could die. Proof that divinity was not eternal. Proof that the divine was, in the end, just another form of matter and energy, subject to the same laws of the Orbis as everything else. And if a god's heart could be studied, measured, and understood, then it could be used. Kagrenac saw the heart and saw an opportunity, not just to power the Numidium, but to demonstrate, irrevocably, that the Dwemer understanding of reality was correct, that the gods were not above the world, but within it, that the Chimer faith was built on a misunderstanding of the nature of existence. Nerevar, the Hortator of the Chimer, tried to stop him, not with war, not at first, with words, with diplomacy. The accounts in Nerevar at Red Mountain describe meetings between Nerevar and Dumac, the Dwemer king, oaths of friendship, promises of peace. Nerevar even brought the tribunal, Vivec, Almalexia, and Sothasil to negotiate, to find a way to share Morrowind without tearing it apart. But Kagrenac had already begun the work. In the deep halls of Bethuand, in the workshops beneath Bam's Amshend, the tonal architects were already testing the frequencies. The tools were already being forged. The Numidium's frame was already rising in the hidden chambers, a colossus of brass and ambition waiting for its animating spark. Nerevar's diplomacy was doomed from the start. Not because Dumac was dishonest. By all accounts, the Dwemer king genuinely wanted peace, but because Kagrenac's project was not a political matter, it was a metaphysical one, and metaphysics, to the Dwemer, did not negotiate. The Chimer faith said, the gods are real, and we are their children. The Dwemer logic said, the gods are mechanisms, and we can build better ones. There was no middle ground, no compromise, no treaty that could bridge that gap. And so the war came. To understand what Kagrenac was attempting, you need to understand tonal architecture, the Dwemer's most profound and dangerous discovery. The Dwemer did not see the world the way other races did. Where the Chimer saw the hand of the gods, the Dwemer saw patterns. Where the Nords saw the throat of the world as sacred, the Dwemer saw a resonance chamber. Where the Altmer revered the adamantine tower as the first structure of creation, the Dwemer saw a metaphysical anchor point, a tower, in the technical sense, holding reality in place through a specific tonal frequency. Tonal architecture was the Dwemer's answer to magic. While other races manipulated magicka, the energy of Aetherius flowing through the sun and stars, the Dwemer, manipulated sound. Not sound as mortals hear it, but the fundamental tones of the orbis itself. The frequencies at which the earthbones, the dead gods who became the laws of nature, resonated. The harmonic structures that held matter together, that separated one moment from the next, that defined the difference between existence and void. In divine metaphysics, the Dwemer philosopher Bethuand writes, "The orbis is a song, and the gods are its singers." But a song can be learned, a song can be changed, and a song can be sung by new voices if those voices understand the notes. The Dwemer understood the notes. They discovered that certain materials, brass especially, and certain alloys of quicksilver and soul gems could be tuned to resonate with the earth bones. That specific geometric patterns could amplify or dampen those resonances. That sound, applied with precision, could alter the fundamental properties of matter, make stone lighter, make metal harder, make the boundary between life and death negotiable. This was not magic. Magic required a connection to Etherius, a gift from the gods. Tonal architecture required only understanding. It was replicable, teachable, improvable. It was, in the Dwemer view, proof that the divine was not a gift, but a technology. And if divinity was a technology, then it could be engineered. The Numidium was the culmination of that logic, a god built from brass and mathematics, a walking tower, a construct that would not merely anchor reality, but redefine it. The Dwemer called it Numidium, the is-not god, the god of refusal. It would be powered by the Heart of Lorkhan, yes, but its function was not to worship the heart. Its function was to deny the very premise of worship. The Numidium's purpose was to say no to the orbis itself, to reject the dream, to prove that consciousness could exist outside the framework the gods had created, and in doing so, to demonstrate that the Dwemer were not subjects of the gods, but their equals, or their superiors. Kagrenac's tools, keening, sunder, wraithguard, were the instruments of that proof. They were not weapons. They were tuning forks, scalpels, precision instruments designed to interface with the heart's tonal frequency and redirect its power into the Numidium's frame. But they were also more than that. They were a statement, a declaration, a final, irrevocable argument in brass and sound. We do not need your gods. We can make our own. And when the Chimer army came to stop them, Kagrenac had a choice: surrender the tools, abandon the project, and admit that the Dwemer had been wrong, or strike the heart, activate the Numidium, and prove once and for all that they had been right. The three tools of Kagrenac are among the most dangerous artifacts in Tamriel's history. Not because of their raw power, though they possess that in abundance, but because of what they represent. Each one is a masterwork of Dwemer Tonal Architecture, designed for a specific function in the grand metaphysical experiment that would become the Numidium. Keening is a blade, but not in the conventional sense. It does not cut flesh. It cuts tones. The fundamental frequencies that hold matter together, that define the boundary between one thing and another. In the hands of a skilled tonal architect, keening could sever the connection between a soul and a body, between a god and its power, between existence and the dream. It is a scalpel for reality itself. The blade is short, curved, and inscribed with geometric patterns that shift depending on the angle of observation. Those patterns are not decorative. They are functional, resonance chambers etched into the metal, designed to amplify the wielder's intent and translate it into tonal disruption. To hold keening without wraithguard is to invite unmaking. The tool does not distinguish between the target and the wielder. It cuts what it touches, and what it touches includes the hand that holds it. Sunder is a hammer, and its function is more direct. Where keening cuts, sunder strikes. It is designed to deliver a precise tonal impact to the Heart of Lorkhan, a blow that would not damage the heart, but would force it to resonate at a specific frequency. the frequency of the Numidium, the frequency of refusal. The hammer's head is brass, inlaid with soul gems that glow faintly even when dormant. Those gems are not power sources. They are tuning mechanisms, calibrated to the heart's natural rhythm. When Sunda strikes, it does not merely hit, it sings. And the heart, being a fragment of a god, sings back. That exchange, that tonal dialogue between hammer and heart, is what Kagrenac intended to harness. Wraithguard is the shield, the safeguard, the only thing standing between the wielder and the unmaking inherent in touching divinity. It is a gauntlet, heavy and ornate, inscribed with protective wards that resonate at a frequency opposite to keening and sunder. Where the other tools disrupt, Wraithguard stabilizes. It creates a tonal barrier around the wielder, a pocket of silence in which the wielder can manipulate the heart without being consumed by it. Without Wraithguard, to touch the heart is to die. Not slowly, not painfully, simply to cease. The heart's power is too vast, too fundamental for mortal flesh to endure. Even the tribunal, when they later used Kagrenac's tools to achieve their own divinity, required Wraithguard to survive the process. The design philosophy behind the tools is revealing. They are not built for power. They are built for precision, for control, for proof. A weapon designed to destroy would be crude, overwhelming, indiscriminate. These tools are the opposite. They are surgical, intentional. They do exactly what they are designed to do, and nothing more. Kagrenac spent decades perfecting them. The accounts in The Egg of Time reference his journals, though the journals themselves have never been found. But the ruins of Dwemer strongholds across Morrowind bear evidence of his work. In Arkenthams, there are chambers where the stone has been altered, made lighter, denser, transparent, through tonal manipulation. In Bethardams, there are workshops where failed prototypes of the tools still hum faintly. Their resonance chambers incomplete, but functional enough to warp the air around them. These were not the experiments of a desperate architect. These were the methodical tests of a scientist refining a theory. Kagrenac knew what he was doing. He knew the risks, and he knew the cost. When the Chimer army breached the final defenses of Red Mountain, when Nerevar and the Tribunal entered the chamber where the heart pulsed in its cradle of volcanic glass, Kagrenac was ready. The tools were complete. The Numidium's frame was prepared. The tonal frequencies were calibrated. All that remained was the choice. Let's pause and take stock of where we are. The Dwemer and the Chimer have been arguing for generations about the nature of divinity. The Chimer say the gods are real, sacred, and should be worshipped. The Dwemer say the gods are mechanisms, subject to the same laws as everything else, and can be understood, manipulated, and even replaced. The Heart of Lorkhan, beating beneath Red Mountain, is the proof both sides need. The Chimer see it as sacred. The Dwemer see it as a power source for the Numidium, a god they're building to prove gods can be built. Kagrenac has spent decades perfecting the tools to interface with the heart. Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard are ready. The Numidium's frame is prepared. The tonal frequencies are calibrated. All that's left is to strike the heart and activate the system. And then Nerevar's army arrives. The question is, what did Kagrenac see when Nerevar broke through the final defenses? What was going through his mind in that moment? The Battle of Red Mountain was not a skirmish, it was a siege. The Chimer forces, led by Nerevar and supported by the Tribunal, had been fighting their way through the Dwemer defenses for days. The tunnels beneath Vardenfell ran red with blood, Chimer and Dwemer both. The air was thick with ash and the smell of burning metal. The Dwemer automata, the centurions and spheres and spiders, fought with mechanical precision, but the Chimer had numbers and faith and the fury of a people who believed their gods were watching. Nerevar himself was a force of nature. The Hortator, the war leader chosen by the Chimer clans, wielded the blade True Flame and wore the ring Moon and Star, gifts from Azura herself, or so the Chimer believed. He cut through the Dwemer lines with the certainty of prophecy behind him. Azura had promised him victory. Azura had promised him that the heart would be protected, that the Dwemer's blasphemy would be stopped, and Nerevar believed. Behind him came the tribunal, Vivek, the poet-warrior, whose sermons would later reshape Chimer theology, Almalexia, the healer queen, whose presence inspired the Chimer soldiers to fight beyond exhaustion, Sotha Sil, the sorcerer smith, whose understanding of magic rivaled even the Dwemer's tonal architecture. They were not yet gods, not yet, but they were close. They could feel it. The heart was near. And once the Dwemer were defeated, once Kagrenac was stopped, the tribunal would have their chance to claim the power they believed was their destiny. Dumak, the Dwemer king, made his last stand in the outer chambers. The accounts are fragmentary, but they agree on this. Dumak fought Nerevar directly, king against Hortator, friend against friend. The two had sworn oaths of peace once, had shared bread and strategy, and the hope that Morrowind could be shared. But those oaths were ash now, burned away by the heat of the heart and the weight of incompatible truths. Dumak fell. Whether Nerevar killed him or whether he died defending the path to Kagrenac's chamber, the sources do not agree. But he fell. And with his fall, the last defense collapsed. Nerevar and the tribunal entered the heart chamber. Kagrenac stood alone. The Heart of Lorkhan pulsed before him, suspended in its cradle of volcanic glass and ancient wards. The tools were in his hands, Wraithguard on his left arm, Sunda in his right hand, keening at his belt. The Numidium's frame loomed behind him, a colossus of brass waiting for its spark. Nerevar raised true flame. The tribunal readied their spells. The ultimatum was unspoken but clear. Surrender the tools. Step away from the heart. Let the Chimer claim what is sacred. Kagrenac looked at them, looked at the heart, looked at the Numidium, and he struck. The first tone was not a sound, not in the way mortals understand sound. It was a frequency, a vibration that resonated through the earth bones, through the stone of Red Mountain, through the very fabric of the Orbis. When Sunda struck the Heart of Lorkhan, the impact was felt across Tamriel. In the chamber, the heart responded. It pulsed, brighter, faster, its rhythm synchronizing with the tone Kagrenac had imposed upon it. The wards around it flared and shattered. The volcanic glass cradle cracked, and the heart sang. Every Dwemer heard it. In the tunnels beneath Vardenfell, the Dwemer warriors stopped mid-swing. In the workshops of Bethardams, the craftsmen looked up from their forges. In the libraries of Arkenthams, the scholars dropped their books. They all heard the same thing, a tone, clear and undeniable, resonating in their bones, in their blood, in the core of their being. Yagrum Bagan, in an outer realm, felt it too. I felt a stirring, a change, he would later say. But I was too far away. I was not connected. I did not hear the call clearly, but the others did, and they answered. The unraveling began with the skin. Dwemer flesh turned to ash, fine and grey, the colour of Morrowind's eternal fall. The ash did not scatter. It held its shape for a moment, a perfect outline of the body it had been, and then it collapsed inward, compressing, condensing, becoming something else. Not matter, not energy, tone. The Dwemer did not die. They transformed. Their consciousness, their souls, their very essence was severed from the dream, cut free by Keening's edge, struck into a new frequency by Sunda's blow, held together by the resonance of the heart. And they were pulled, all of them, across Tamriel, across the boundaries of space and time, into the Numidium. In the heart chamber, the tribunal watched in horror. Vivek would later write about this moment in the 36 Lessons, though his account is cryptic, layered with metaphor and theological spin. But the core of it is clear. The Dwemer did not vanish. They became. They were not destroyed. They were transformed. And the thing they became was the god they had been trying to build. The Numidium's brass skin shimmered. The geometric patterns etched into its surface began to glow. The soul gems embedded in its frame pulsed with light, not the light of magicka, but the light of consciousness. Millions of Dwemer souls, compressed into a single tonal frequency, bound into the frame of the walking tower. Kagrenac had done it. He had proven that divinity was not a gift from the gods, but a state of being that could be engineered. He had severed the Dwemer from the dream and bound them into a construct that existed outside the framework of Aetherius and Oblivion. The Numidium was not a god in the way the Aedra or Daedra were gods. It was something else, something new, something that said no to the very premise of the Orbis. And in doing so, Kagrenac had won the argument. The Chimer faith said, the gods are real, and we are their children. The Dwemer logic said, the gods are mechanisms, and we can build better ones. Kagrenac had built one. He had proven it was possible. He had demonstrated irrevocably that the Dwemer understanding of reality was correct. The cost was every Dwemer life on Nirn, including his own. Kagrenac's body was the last to transform. He stood before the heart, Wraithguard still on his arm, Sunda still in his hand, and he smiled. Or so Vivek claims. Whether that's true or poetic license, we'll never know, but the image is fitting. Kagrenac, the chief tonal architect, the one who would rather erase his entire species than admit he was wrong, smiling as he dissolved into ash and tone and became part of the god he had built. The Numidium stood, silent, waiting. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with the light of 1,000,000 Dwemer souls. It did not move. Not yet. It was incomplete. The heart's power was there. But the activation sequence was not finished. Kagrenac had struck the heart, had bound the Dwemer into the frame, but he had not given the Numidium its purpose. He had not told it what to do. And then he was gone. And the Numidium stood silent in the chamber. A god without a command, a weapon without a target, a proof without a conclusion. The tribunal stared at it, at the heart, at the tools, lying on the ground where Kagrenac had dropped them, and they made a choice of their own. What did the Dwemer prove? This is the question that haunts Tamriel's theologians and metaphysicians to this day. The Dwemer vanished. That much is fact. But what does their vanishing mean? Was it a failure or a success, a mistake or a triumph? The answer depends on what you believe about the nature of the Orbis. The Chimer faith, and later, the Tribunal Temple, taught that the Dwemer were punished for their hubris, that they reached too far, touched what should not be touched, and were erased by the gods as a warning to all who would follow. Azura's curse, they said. Divine retribution, the price of blasphemy. But the evidence does not support that interpretation. If the Dwemer were punished, why did the Numidium remain? Why did the heart continue to beat? Why did Kagrenac's tools survive, functional and intact? A divine punishment would have destroyed the tools, shattered the Numidium, silenced the heart. Instead, everything Kagrenac built remained, waiting, ready. The Dwemer proved that consciousness can be severed from the dream, that souls, mortal souls, not divine ones, can be extracted from the framework of the Orbis and bound into a new structure. That divinity is not a gift from the gods, but a state of being that can be engineered through sufficient understanding of the underlying tonal architecture of reality. They proved that the gods are mechanisms. This is the core of the Dwemer's metaphysical claim, and it is the claim that the Chimer could not accept. The Chimer faith was built on the premise that the gods were real, that they cared, that they had authority. If the gods were just mechanisms, powerful, yes, but ultimately subject to the same laws as everything else, then what was the point of worship? What was the point of prophecy? What was the point of faith? The Dwemer's disappearance refuted the Chimer claim, not by destroying the Chimer, but by demonstrating that the Dwemer could do what the gods did. They could create divinity. They could build a god. And they could do it without the god's permission. The cost was existence itself, but the proof was irrevocable. Vivek understood this. In the 36 lessons, he writes about the Dwemer with a mixture of contempt and grudging respect. He calls them fools, he calls them blind, but he also calls them the closest to the truth. He acknowledges, in his cryptic way, that the Dwemer were not wrong. They were just willing to pay a price that no one else would pay. And then Vivek and the tribunal paid a similar price. After the Dwemer vanished, after the Numidium stood silent in the heart chamber, the tribunal made a choice. They picked up Kagrenac's tools, they studied them, they learned how to use them, and they struck the heart themselves, not to build a god, to become gods. The irony is almost too perfect. The Chimer, who fought the Dwemer to protect the sanctity of the heart, who believed the Dwemer were committing blasphemy, used the Dwemer's methods to achieve their own apotheosis. Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil became the tribunal, the living gods of Morrowind, by doing exactly what Kagrenac had done. They used tonal architecture to sever themselves from mortality and bind themselves to the heart's power. The difference was intent. Kagrenac wanted to prove a point. The tribunal wanted to rule. Kagrenac was willing to erase his entire species to demonstrate that the Dwemer were right. The tribunal was willing to betray Nerevar, to murder their friend and Hortator, to claim the power they believed was their destiny. Both used the same tools. Both touched the same heart. Both achieved divinity through the same metaphysical mechanism. But the Dwemer vanished, and the tribunal endured. Why? The answer lies in the nature of the Numidium. Kagrenac did not just want to create a god, he wanted to create a god that said no to the Orbis, a god that existed outside the dream, a god that refuted the premise of divine authority. To do that, he needed to sever the Dwemer from the dream entirely. He needed to transform them into something that was not mortal and not divine in the traditional sense, something new. The tribunal, by contrast, wanted to be gods within the dream. They wanted to rule Morrowind, to be worshipped, to have authority. They did not want to escape the Orbis. They wanted to dominate it. So they used the heart's power differently. They did not sever themselves from the dream. They anchored themselves to it, using the heart as a tether. They became gods. Yes, but gods who still existed within the framework the Aedra had created. Gods who still needed the heart to sustain them. And that dependence would be their undoing. But that comes later. For now, the point is this. The Dwemer proved that the Chimer faith was built on a misunderstanding. The gods were not authorities. They were mechanisms. And the tribunal, by using Kagrenac's tools, admitted, whether they realized it or not, that the Dwemer had been right all along. Yagrum Bagan is the key to understanding what Kagrenac intended. He is the last Dwemer, the only one who survived the disappearance. And his survival was not luck. It was geometry. When the Nerevarine finds Yagrum in the Corpusarium beneath Tel Fir, he is a ruin of a person. Bloated with corpus disease, his body swollen and distorted. His mind still sharp, but his memories fragmented. He has lived for thousands of years, alone, the last remnant of a civilization that vanished in an instant, and he has no idea why he survived. I have no idea what happened, he says. I was not there to observe. I was in an outer realm at the time, and when I came back, my people were gone. I have searched everywhere. I have found no survivors, no explanation, only ruins and silence. His testimony is critical because it reveals the nature of the disappearance. Yagrum was in an outer realm, one of the planes of oblivion, or perhaps a pocket dimension of the Dwemer's own creation. He was not on Nirn. He was not connected to the tonal network that Kagrenac activated when he struck the heart, and so he was not called. This tells us something important. The disappearance was not a blast. It was not a wave of destruction radiating out from Red Mountain. It was a signal. a tonal frequency broadcast across a specific network, and only those connected to that network, only those who were Dwemer on Nirn at the moment Kagrenac struck, were affected. Yagrum was outside the network. He was disconnected, and so he remained. The implication is staggering. If the disappearance required connection, then it was not an accident. It was not a catastrophic failure of tonal architecture. It was a deliberate activation of a system that Kagrenac had designed, a system that required every Dwemer on Nirn to participate. But did they choose to participate, or were they simply used? This is the question that haunts the ruins. In the libraries of Arkanthams, in the workshops of Bethardams, in the halls of Mumzulft and Shuanzel, there are no signs of panic, no signs of struggle. The Dwemer were going about their daily lives when it happened, forging, studying, building, and then they were gone. If Kagrenac had warned them, if he had told them what he was planning, would they have agreed? Would the craftsmen in Bethardams have willingly dissolved into ash to become part of the Numidium? Would the scholars in Arkanthams have sacrificed their existence to prove a philosophical point? We don't know. The Dwemer left no final messages, no farewells, no explanations, just empty armor and cold forges and the hum of machinery that no longer has operators. Kagrenac's final calculation required every Dwemer soul as a component. The Numidium was not powered by the heart alone. It was powered by the Dwemer themselves, their consciousness, their essence, their tonal frequency, all of it compressed and bound into the brass frame. A god made not from worship, but from the willing or unwilling sacrifice of an entire species. Did they hear the call? Did they understand what was happening in the moment before they transformed? Did they have a choice? Or did Kagrenac simply use them? Did he activate the system without their consent, without their knowledge, because he knew they would not agree? Because he knew that most Dwemer, for all their logic and refusal, would choose existence over proof? The ruins do not answer. Yagrum does not know. And Kagrenac is ash and tone, bound into the god he built, unable to explain. But the pattern suggests intent. Kagrenac spent decades preparing. He built the tools. He calibrated the frequencies. He designed the Numidium to require every Dwemer soul. He knew what would happen when he struck the heart. He knew the cost, and he struck anyway. This is not the action of a desperate architect making a mistake under pressure. This is the action of a philosopher who valued being right over being alive, who valued proof over people, who would rather erase his entire species than admit that the Chimer gods might have authority. Yagrum's survival is the proof of Kagrenac's intent. If the disappearance were an accident, Yagrum would have vanished too. Distance would not have mattered, but he was outside the system. He was not connected, and so he was not called. The Dwemer did not vanish by accident. They were called, and Kagrenac was the one who made the call. The Numidium did not stay silent forever. Centuries after the Dwemer vanished, the brass god walked again. Not under Dwemer control, not under Kagrenac's guidance, but under the command of Tiber Septim, the man who would become Talos, the ninth divine. The story of how Tiber Septim acquired the Numidium is a tale of politics, betrayal, and metaphysical ambition. The tribunal, who had been using the heart to sustain their divinity for millennia, still possessed Kagrenac's tools. But the Numidium itself had been dormant, incomplete, waiting for someone who understood its purpose and had the will to activate it. Tiber Septim was that someone. With the help of the Underking, a figure whose identity is disputed, but who possessed deep knowledge of Dwemer Tonal Architecture, Tiber Septim reactivated the Numidium. He gave it a purpose, not to prove a philosophical point, not to refute the gods, but to conquer, to unify Tamriel under a single empire, to become a god himself. The Numidium walked across Tamriel, and where it walked, reality broke. The brass god's power was not like the power of the Aedra or the Daedra. It did not create, It did not destroy in the conventional sense, it denied. It said no to the orbis, to the laws of time and space, to the very premise of existence. When the Numidium walked, time fractured, causality bent, the past and future bled into the present. This is what the Dwemer had built, a god that could break reality itself. The most dramatic demonstration of the Numidium's power came during the event known as the Warp in the West. In the year 3E417, in the Iliac Bay region, the Numidium was activated once more. The details are murky. Multiple factions claim to have controlled it. Multiple outcomes were reported, and the historical record is a mess of contradictions. That's because all of them happened. The Numidium's activation caused a dragon break, a fracture in the linear flow of time. For 3 days, the Iliac Bay existed in multiple states simultaneously. Kingdoms rose and fell. Battles were won and lost. The Numidium walked and did not walk. And when the dragon break ended, when time reasserted itself, the region had been reshaped. 6 kingdoms had been reduced to 4. Borders had shifted. Entire cities had changed hands, and no one could agree on what had actually happened. This is the Numidium's legacy, not conquest, not destruction, but the unmaking of certainty itself. The Dwemer built a god that could deny reality, and when that god walked, reality bent to accommodate the contradiction. Kagrenac had been right. The Dwemer had proven that divinity was a mechanism, that consciousness could be severed from the dream, that a god could be built from logic and refusal. And the cost of that proof was not just the Dwemer themselves, it was the stability of the orbis. Every time the Numidium walked, it left a scar on reality, a wound that did not heal, a reminder that the Dwemer had touched something fundamental and had changed it in ways that could not be undone. And the Dwemer themselves, they were still there, still bound into the Numidium's frame, still part of the god they had become. Millions of souls compressed into a single tonal frequency denied the dream, denied the afterlife, denied everything except the purpose Kagrenac had given them. They had won the argument. They had proven they were right, and the cost was everything. The Numidium's final fate is unclear. Some sources say it was destroyed during the warp in the West. Others say it was deactivated, dismantled, hidden away. But the truth is, it doesn't matter. The Numidium's existence, even its brief, catastrophic activations, proved what the Dwemer had set out to prove. The gods are mechanisms. Divinity can be engineered. And the orbis is not a sacred creation, but a system that can be understood, manipulated, and broken. The Dwemer paid for that proof with their existence. But the proof remains, and Tamriel has been living with the consequences ever since. Let's take a moment to step back and see the full picture. The Dwemer vanished in 1E700 when Kagrenac struck the Heart of Lorkhan. They did not die, they transformed. They were severed from the dream and bound into the Numidium, the brass god they had been building to prove that divinity was a mechanism, not a gift. Kagrenac chose this. He chose proof over existence. He chose to be right over being alive. The tribunal witnessed this. They saw the Dwemer vanish. They saw the Numidium awaken. And they picked up Kagrenac's tools and used them to achieve their own divinity. They became gods using Dwemer methods, proving, whether they admitted it or not, that the Dwemer had been right. Centuries later, Tiber Septim reactivated the Numidium and used it to conquer Tamriel. The brass god walked, and reality broke. The warp in the West demonstrated that the Numidium's power was not just military, but metaphysical. It could deny the orbis itself, and through it all, the Dwemer remained, bound into the god they had built, denied the dream, denied the afterlife, denied everything except the proof they had died to create. This is the legacy of the Dwemer. This is what their disappearance means. But why does this matter to Tamriel now? Why does the story of a vanished civilization still echo through the ages? Because the Dwemer's disappearance left a wound, not just in Morrowind, not just in the ruins they left behind, but in the metaphysical structure of Tamriel itself. The tribunal's divinity was built on Dwemer corpses. They used Kagrenac's tools. They drew power from the heart. And for millennia, they ruled Morrowind as living gods, worshipped by the Dunmer, feared by their enemies, sustained by the very mechanism the Dwemer had created. But the heart was not infinite, and the tribunal's connection to it was not stable. In the Third Era, Dagoth-Ur returned. Another figure who had been present at the Battle of Red Mountain. Another figure who had touched the heart, but unlike the tribunal, Dagoth-Ur had been consumed by it, transformed, driven mad by the power and the isolation and the centuries of waiting beneath Red Mountain. Dagoth-Ur wanted to finish what Kagrenac had started. He wanted to rebuild the Numidium, or rather, build a new version of it, Lorkhan, the second Numidium. He wanted to use the heart's power to reshape Morrowind, to spread the blight, to transform the Dunmer into something new, something that would worship him as a god. The tribunal could not stop him. They were weakening. Their connection to the heart was failing. Dagoth-Ur controlled the heart chamber, and without access to the heart, the tribunal's divinity was fading. Enter the Nerevarine. The reincarnation of Nerevar, prophesied by Azura, sent to finish what Nerevar had started, to stop the misuse of the heart, to sever the tribunal's power, to destroy Dagoth-Ur, and to do it, the Nerevarine had to use Kagrenac's tools. The irony is almost unbearable. The Nerevarine, the champion of Azura, the one sent to stop the blasphemy, had to use the very tools the Dwemer had created, had to wear Wraithguard, had to wield Keening and Sunder, had to strike the heart, just as Kagrenac had done. But the Nerevarine's purpose was different, not to activate the heart, to destroy it. When the Nerevarine struck the heart with Keening and Sunder, the heart shattered. Not physically, the heart of a god cannot be destroyed in the conventional sense, but its connection to Mundus was severed. Its power was cut off. And with that severance, the tribunal's divinity ended. Vivec, Almalexia, and Sothasil were no longer gods. They were mortals again, sustained only by the remnants of the power they had stolen. Almalexia went mad and was killed by the Nerevarine. Sothasil was already dead, murdered by Almalexia in her madness. Vivec disappeared, his fate unknown. The tribunal fell, and with their fall, the truth became undeniable. The Dwemer had been right. The gods were mechanisms. Divinity was not eternal. It could be created, and it could be destroyed. The tribunal had proven it by becoming gods. The Nerevarine had proven it by unmaking them, and the cost of that proof, the cost the Dwemer had paid, the cost the tribunal had paid, the cost Morrowind had paid, was written in ash and blood, and the ruins of a civilization that chose to be right over being alive. The Dwemer's disappearance is not just a historical curiosity. It is a pattern, a template, a proof of concept that other forces in Tamriel have studied, envied, and attempted to replicate. To understand why, you need to understand the towers. The towers are the metaphysical anchors of reality. They are structures, some physical, some conceptual, that hold the orbis in place, that maintain the separation between Mundus and oblivion, that keep the dream stable. The Adamantine Tower, the oldest, was the first structure of creation, the place where the Aedra convened and decided to create Mundus. Red Mountain, with the Heart of Lorkhan at its core, was another tower. The White Gold Tower in Cyrodiil, the Throat of the World in Skyrim, the Crystal Tower in Somerset, each one a pillar holding reality together. The Dwemer understood the towers, they studied them, they mapped their tonal frequencies, and they realized something that terrified and exhilarated them in equal measure. The towers were not divine gifts, they were mechanisms, and mechanisms could be manipulated. The Numidium was the Dwemer's attempt to build a tower of their own, not a tower that anchored reality, but a tower that denied it. A walking tower, a god that could move, that could say no to the Orbis and make the Orbis listen. The Dwemer succeeded, and their success proved that the towers, and by extension, reality itself, were not sacred. They were systems, and systems could be broken. This is the knowledge that haunts Tamriel. In the Fourth Era, the Thalmor, the ruling faction of the Aldmeri Dominion, have a project. They want to unmake Mundus. To return to the state of divinity, the Altmer believe they lost when the Aedra created the mortal world, to undo creation itself and return to the timeless, perfect existence of the Aetherius. And to do that, they are deactivating the towers. The Crystal Tower fell during the Oblivion Crisis. The White Gold Tower was compromised when the Amulet of Kings shattered. Red Mountain's tower was severed when the Nerevarine destroyed the heart. One by one, the anchors of reality are failing, and the Thalmor are watching, waiting, guiding the process toward their ultimate goal. The Thalmor's project echoes the Dwemer's logic. Both understand that the gods are mechanisms. Both understand that reality is a system. Both are willing to pay an enormous cost to prove they are right. But there is a difference. The Dwemer wanted to transcend. They wanted to sever themselves from the dream and exist outside it, as something new, something that did not need the gods or the Orbis. They wanted to escape. The Thalmor want to return. They want to undo the mistake of creation, to unmake Mundus, to go back to the state of divinity they believe they lost. They want to erase the mortal world and everyone in it. The Dwemer were willing to erase themselves to prove a point. The Thalmor are willing to erase everyone else. The pattern is the same. The logic is the same. The understanding of the towers, of the Arbis, of the nature of divinity, it all traces back to the Dwemer, to Kagrenac, to the moment he struck the heart and proved that reality could be broken. The Dwemer asked, "Can we escape the dream?" The Thalmor ask, "Can we end the dream?" And both questions are rooted in the same metaphysical insight. The dream is not sacred. It is a system, and systems can be changed. This is why the Dwemer's disappearance matters. Not because they are gone, but because they proved it was possible. They proved that consciousness could be severed from the dream. They proved that the towers could be manipulated. They proved that the gods were mechanisms. And now, centuries later, other forces are using that proof to pursue their own ends. The map of Tamriel is a map of towers. The adamantine tower in High Rock, still standing. The throat of the world in Skyrim, still anchoring the northern reaches. The white gold tower in Cyrodiil, compromised but not destroyed. Red Mountain in Morrowind, its heart severed but its structure intact. The Crystal Tower in Somerset, fallen. The Green Sap Tower in Valenwood, its status unclear. The Orichalc Tower in Yokoda, lost beneath the waves. The Numidium, the Walking Tower, the Dwemer's final proof, dormant or destroyed depending on which account you believe. Each tower is a thread in the fabric of reality, and the Dwemer proved that those threads could be cut. The question is not whether the Thalmor will succeed. The question is whether anyone will stop them. Whether anyone will recognize the pattern, understand the stakes, and act before the last tower falls and the dream ends. The Dwemer chose disappearance over losing an argument. The Thalmor are choosing the end of the world over admitting they might be wrong, and Tamriel is caught in the middle, living in the shadow of a civilization that proved the gods were mechanisms and paid for that proof with everything they were. In the ruins of Arkenthams, deep in the Reach, there is a chamber that few travelers find. The Dwemer built it as a workshop, a place where tonal architects tested their theories and refined their instruments. The walls are lined with brass panels, etched with geometric patterns that shift in the torchlight. The air hums faintly, even now, millennia after the Dwemer vanished. The machinery is silent, but the resonance remains. In the center of the chamber, on a pedestal of volcanic glass, sits a mask. Kagrenac's mask, or one like it. Brass, ornate, inscribed with the same patterns that cover Keening and Sunder and Wraithguard. The eye sockets are empty, the metal is cold, but the mask still hums, faintly, with the tonal frequency of the Dwemer who wore it. This is the image that haunts Tamriel, not the Numidium towering and terrible, not the heart pulsing with divine power, but the mask, empty, silent, a reminder that the Dwemer were people, that they had faces, names, lives, that they chose to erase all of that to prove a point, and the point was this: we do not need your gods, we can make our own. They were right, and it destroyed them. The Dwemer's disappearance is not a tragedy in the conventional sense. It is not a story of innocent victims struck down by cruel fate. It is a story of a civilization that understood the nature of reality better than anyone else in Tamriel, and chose to act on that understanding, no matter the cost. Kagrenac stood before the Heart of Lorkhan with the tools of proof in his hands and a choice before him: surrender and admit that the Chimer gods might have authority, or strike and prove that the Dwemer were right, that divinity was a mechanism, that consciousness could be severed from the dream. He struck, and every Dwemer on Nirn became part of the god they had been trying to build. This is not a mistake. This is not an accident. This is the logical conclusion of a philosophy that valued truth over existence, that valued being right over being alive, and the consequences of that choice are still unfolding. The tribunal used Kagrenac's tools and became gods. Tiber Septim used the Numidium and conquered Tamriel. The Nerevarine used the tools and destroyed the heart. The Thalmor study the towers and plan the end of the world. Every major metaphysical event in Tamriel's history since the Dwemer vanished has been shaped, directly or indirectly, by what Kagrenac proved in that chamber beneath Red Mountain. The gods are mechanisms. Divinity can be engineered. Reality can be broken. The Dwemer paid for that proof with their existence, but the proof remains, and Tamriel is still living with it. So what does this mean for us? For the people of Tamriel who are not tonal architects, who do not have Kagrenac's tools, who do not want to unmake reality or become gods, it means we live in a world where the fundamental nature of existence is not settled, where the gods are not unquestionable authorities, but powerful entities subject to the same metaphysical laws as everything else, where the towers that hold reality together can be deactivated, manipulated, broken, where the dream itself is not sacred, but a system that can be changed. The Dwemer asked, "Can we escape the dream?" They answered, "Yes, but the cost is everything." The question for Tamriel now is, what do we do with that answer? Do we follow the Dwemer's path? Do we seek to transcend, to escape, to build our own gods and sever ourselves from the dream? Do we follow the Thalmor's path and seek to end the dream entirely, to unmake Mundus and return to the timeless divinity of Aetherius? Or do we find a third path, a path that acknowledges the Dwemer's proof, that the gods are mechanisms, that reality is a system, but chooses to live within that system rather than break it? A path that values existence over proof, that values being alive over being right. The Dwemer made their choice, and they are gone. The rest of Tamriel has yet to make ours. But there is one more thread to pull, one more tower that might hold an answer. The throat of the world, the highest peak in Skyrim, is a tower in its own right. And at its summit, the Greybeards guard a secret, a word, a shout, a tonal frequency that does not break reality but bends it, that does not deny the dream but speaks within it. The Dwemer used tonal architecture to escape the dream. But what if there is a way to use it to understand the dream, to speak to it, rather than shout it down? That is a story for another time. But it begins at the throat of the world. And it begins with a question the Dwemer never asked. What if being right is not the point? What if the point is to listen? The Dwemer's philosophy was not born in a vacuum. It was the product of centuries of observation, experimentation, and a fundamental rejection of the premise that divinity required worship. Other cultures in Tamriel approached the gods with reverence. The Nords worshipped the divines and honored their ancestors. The Altmer revered their Aedric heritage and sought to reclaim their lost divinity. The Dunmer followed the Tribunal and the Daedra, building their entire culture around faith and prophecy. Even the Khajiit and Argonians, with their unique cosmologies, approached the divine with a sense of sacred mystery. The Dwemer approached the divine with a wrench and a notebook. This was not atheism in the conventional sense. The Dwemer did not deny that the gods existed. They simply refused to accept that existence implied authority. A god to the Dwemer was a powerful entity, vastly more powerful than a mortal, yes, but still subject to the same fundamental laws of the Orbis. The gods were not creators standing outside creation. They were participants within it, and anything within the system could be understood, measured, and manipulated. This is the core insight of divine metaphysics, the Dwemer philosophical text that laid the groundwork for Kagrenac's project. The text argues that the Orbis is a self-contained system, that the gods are emergent properties of that system rather than its architects, and that consciousness, mortal or divine, is a function of tonal resonance rather than a gift from above. If consciousness is a function of tonal resonance, then it can be engineered. This is the leap that led to the Numidium. If the gods are powerful because they resonate at specific frequencies, then a construct that resonates at the right frequency would be indistinguishable from a god. And if that construct could be designed to resonate at a frequency that denied the premise of the Orbis, that said no to the dream itself, then it would be more than a god. It would be a proof. The Dwemer were not trying to become gods in the way the Tribunal did. They were not seeking worship or immortality or dominion. They were seeking validation. They wanted to prove, irrevocably, that their understanding of reality was correct, that the gods were mechanisms, that divinity was a technology, that the Chimer faith was built on a misunderstanding, and they succeeded. The cost was their existence, but the proof was irrevocable. This raises a question that Tamriel's philosophers have been debating for millennia. Was it worth it? From a purely logical standpoint, the Dwemer achieved their goal. They proved their thesis. They demonstrated that consciousness could be severed from the dream, that divinity could be engineered, that the gods were mechanisms. The Numidium's existence and its subsequent activations validated every claim the Dwemer had made. But from a moral standpoint, the cost is staggering. Millions of Dwemer lives erased in an instant. An entire civilization gone. Families, friendships, loves, dreams, all of it dissolved into ash and tone and bound into a brass god that most of them never consented to become part of. Did Kagrenac have the right to make that choice for his entire species? Did the proof justify the cost? The Dwemer would say yes. Logic does not care about sentiment. Truth does not negotiate with comfort. If the choice is between being right and being alive, and you choose to be alive, then you are admitting that truth is less important than existence. And to the Dwemer, that was unacceptable. But the rest of Tamriel would say no. The Chimer, the Nords, the Imperials, they all value existence over abstract proof. They all believe that life, with all its uncertainty and faith and mystery, is more important than being metaphysically correct. This is the fundamental divide, not between the Dwemer and the Chimer, but between two ways of understanding what it means to be alive. The Dwemer chose proof, and they are gone. The rest of Tamriel chose existence, and they are still here, living in the shadow of the Dwemer's choice, grappling with the consequences of a proof they never asked for. The Tribunal's relationship with the Dwemer's disappearance is one of the great moral contradictions of Tamriel's history. Vivek, Almalexia, and Sotha-Sil witnessed the Dwemer vanish. They saw Kagrenac strike the heart. They saw the Numidium awaken. They saw an entire civilization dissolve into ash and tone in a single instant. And their first thought, after the horror faded, was, "We can use this." The tools were still there. Keening, Sunda, Wraithguard, lying on the ground, where Kagrenac had dropped them, still humming with tonal resonance. The heart was still beating, still pulsing with divine power. The Numidium was dormant, incomplete, but the mechanism was proven. The Dwemer had demonstrated that the heart's power could be harnessed, that divinity could be achieved through tonal architecture. And the tribunal decided to do exactly what the Dwemer had done. But there was a problem. Nerevar was still alive. Nerevar, the Hortator, the one who had led the Chimer army to stop the Dwemer's blasphemy. Nerevar, who had sworn an oath to Azura to protect the heart, to ensure it would never be misused. Nerevar, who trusted the tribunal, who considered them friends, who believed they shared his commitment to the Chimer faith. Nerevar would never agree to use the tools. He would never allow the tribunal to touch the heart. He had fought a war to prevent exactly that, so the tribunal killed him. The accounts are contradictory, layered with centuries of propaganda and theological revision. Vivek's 36 lessons hint at it in metaphor. The Ashlander oral traditions state it plainly. But the core of the story is consistent. Nerevar was betrayed by the people he trusted most. The tribunal murdered their friend, their Hortator, the hero of the Battle of Red Mountain, so they could use Kagrenac's tools and become gods. And then they lied about it. For millennia. The tribunal temple taught that Nerevar died of his wounds after the battle, that he passed peacefully, surrounded by his friends, his mission complete, that the tribunal took up the burden of leadership reluctantly, out of duty to the Chimer people, that their divinity was a gift from the gods, a reward for their service, a sacred trust. None of it was true. The tribunal's divinity was built on Dwemer methods and Chimer blood. They used the tools Kagrenac had created. They struck the heart the way Kagrenac had struck it. They achieved apotheosis through the same metaphysical mechanism the Dwemer had used. The only difference was intent. Kagrenac wanted to prove a point. The tribunal wanted to rule. And rule they did. For thousands of years, the tribunal were the living gods of Morrowind. They protected the Dunmer from external threats. They maintained order. They built the temple, the ordinators, the entire theological and political structure of Dunmeri society. And they did it all while drawing power from the heart, using Kagrenac's tools, standing on the corpses of the Dwemer and the betrayal of Nerevar. The irony is almost unbearable. The Chimer fought the Dwemer to protect the sanctity of the heart. And then the Chimer's leaders used the heart in exactly the way the Dwemer had intended. The tribunal became gods by doing what they had condemned the Dwemer for attempting, and in doing so, they admitted, whether they realized it or not, that the Dwemer had been right. The gods are mechanisms. Divinity can be engineered. The heart's power is not sacred, it is a resource, and anyone with the right tools and the right knowledge can use it. The tribunal spent millennia trying to hide this truth. They suppressed the Ashlander traditions that remembered Nerevar's murder. They persecuted the dissident priests who questioned the temple's teachings. They maintained the fiction that their divinity was a gift, not a theft. But the truth has a way of surfacing. When Dagoth-Ur returned and cut off the tribunal's access to the heart, their power began to fade. When the Nerevarine came, guided by Azura's prophecy, the tribunal's lies unraveled. And when the Nerevarine destroyed the heart, the tribunal's divinity ended. Almalexia went mad, consumed by the loss of her power and the weight of her guilt. She murdered Sotha Sil and tried to kill the Nerevarine. She died in the Clockwork City, raving, broken, a god reduced to a mortal who could not accept what she had become. Sotha Sil retreated into his Clockwork City and built a mechanical replica of Tamriel, trying to understand the world as a system, trying to find a way to sustain divinity without the heart. He failed. He was murdered by Almalexia, alone in his workshop, surrounded by the machines that could not save him. Vivek disappeared. Some say he achieved Chim, the state of enlightenment that allows one to perceive the dream and remain within it. Some say he was killed by the Nerevarine. Some say he simply walked away, unable to bear the weight of what he had done. His fate is unknown, but his legacy is clear. The tribunal's divinity was a lie, and the lie was built on Dwemer corpses and Chimer betrayal. The Dwemer chose to erase themselves to prove they were right. The tribunal chose to erase Nerevar to prove they were gods. Both used the same tools. Both touched the same heart. Both paid a price. But only the Dwemer were honest about the cost. The Dwemer's disappearance established a pattern that Tamriel has been repeating ever since. A pattern of metaphysical ambition, of civilizations that understand the nature of reality and choose to act on that understanding, no matter the cost. The tribunal followed the pattern. They used Dwemer methods to achieve divinity. They ruled for millennia. And they fell when their connection to the heart was severed. Tiber Septim followed the pattern. He reactivated the Numidium, used it to conquer Tamriel, and achieved apotheosis as Talos, the ninth divine. Whether his divinity is real or a product of mythopoeic forces, the belief of millions of worshippers shaping reality, is a matter of debate. But the pattern is the same. Understand the mechanism, use the tools, pay the price. And now, the Thalmor are following the pattern. But they are taking it further than anyone before them. The Thalmor's ultimate goal is not to become gods. It is to unmake Mundus, to end the mortal world and return to the timeless divinity of Aetherius. They believe that the creation of Mundus was a mistake, a trap that severed the Altmer from their divine heritage. And they believe that by deactivating the towers, the metaphysical anchors that hold reality in place, they can undo that mistake and return to the state of grace they lost. This is the Dwemer's logic taken to its ultimate conclusion. The Dwemer proved that the towers were mechanisms. The Thalmor are using that proof to dismantle them. The Crystal Tower fell during the Oblivion Crisis. The White Gold Tower was compromised when Martin Septim shattered the Amulet of Kings to stop Mehrunes Dagon. Red Mountain's tower was severed when the Nerevarine destroyed the heart. The towers are falling one by one, and the Thalmor are watching, waiting, guiding the process. The difference between the Dwemer and the Thalmor is intent. The Dwemer wanted to transcend the dream. They wanted to sever themselves from the Orbis and exist outside it, as something new. They were willing to erase themselves to achieve that goal. The Thalmor want to end the dream. They want to unmake Mundus and everyone in it. They are willing to erase everyone else to achieve their goal. The Dwemer's ambition was self-destructive. The Thalmor's ambition is omnicidal. But the logic is the same. Both understand that the gods are mechanisms. Both understand that the towers are the anchors of reality. Both understand that reality is a system, and systems can be broken. Both are willing to pay an enormous cost to prove they are right. The question is, will anyone stop them? The Dwemer had no opposition that understood what they were doing. The Chimer fought them, yes, but the Chimer were fighting to protect the sanctity of the heart, not to preserve the towers or the dream. The Chimer did not understand the metaphysical stakes. They did not realize that the Dwemer were not just building a god, but attempting to break reality itself. By the time the tribunal understood, it was too late. The Dwemer were gone. The Numidium was built. The proof was established. But the Thalmor's project is slower, more deliberate. The towers are falling over centuries, not in a single instant. There is time to recognize the pattern, time to understand the stakes, time to act. The question is, does anyone in Tamriel understand what is happening? Does anyone see the connection between the Dwemer's disappearance and the Thalmor's project? Does anyone realize that the towers are not just ancient structures, but the pillars holding reality together? The Blades understood once. They were the guardians of the Dragonborn, the protectors of the Empire, the ones who watched for threats to Tamriel's stability. But the Blades were decimated during the Great War. The Thalmor hunted them down, killed them, scattered the survivors. The organization that might have recognized the pattern and opposed it is broken. The Greybeards understand, perhaps. They guard the throat of the world, one of the remaining towers. They teach the way of the voice, a form of tonal architecture that does not break reality, but speaks within it. But the Greybeards are isolationists. They do not intervene in the affairs of the world. They teach those who come to them, but they do not seek out students or warn of dangers. The Psijic order understands, certainly. They are the masters of mysticism, the scholars of the orbis, the ones who study the towers and the nature of reality. But the Psijic order withdrew from Tamriel, taking their island of Artaeum into a pocket dimension, isolating themselves from the conflicts of the mortal world. They watch, but they do not act. So who is left? Who will recognize the pattern and stand against it? The answer, as it has been throughout Tamriel's history, is the player. The Nerevarine, the champion of Cyrodiil, the last dragonborn, the heroes who do not fully understand the metaphysical stakes, but who act anyway, guided by prophecy or duty or simple stubbornness. The Dwemer proved that reality could be broken. The Thalmor are trying to finish what the Dwemer started, and the only thing standing between them and the end of the dream is a handful of heroes who may not even realize what they are fighting for. The pattern repeats, but the outcome is not yet written. So let's return to the question we started with. Why did the Dwemer choose disappearance over losing an argument? The answer is not simple. It is not a matter of pride or stubbornness or madness. It is a matter of philosophy, of what you believe is important, of what you are willing to sacrifice to prove you are right. The Dwemer believed that truth was more important than existence, that being metaphysically correct was more valuable than being alive, that proving the gods were mechanisms was worth the cost of every Dwemer life on Nirn. And they were right. The gods are mechanisms. Divinity can be engineered. The orbis is a system, and systems can be understood, manipulated, and broken. The Numidium proved it. The Tribunal proved it. Tiber Septim proved it. The Thalmor are proving it now. But the cost of that proof is staggering. The Dwemer are gone. The Tribunal fell. Morrowind was devastated. The towers are failing, and the dream itself is under threat. Was it worth it? The Dwemer would say yes. They achieved their goal. They proved their thesis. They demonstrated, irrevocably, that their understanding of reality was correct. The fact that they no longer exist to appreciate that proof is, from their perspective, irrelevant. Truth does not require witnesses. Proof does not require survivors. But the rest of Tamriel would say no. The Chimer, the Nords, the Imperials, the Khajiit, the Argonians, they all value existence over abstract proof. They all believe that life, with all its uncertainty and faith and mystery, is more important than being metaphysically correct. They all choose to live within the dream rather than break it. This is the fundamental question the Dwemer's disappearance poses to Tamriel. What is more important, being right or being alive? The Dwemer chose being right, and they paid the price. The rest of Tamriel has chosen being alive, but they are living in a world shaped by the Dwemer's choice, a world where the gods are known to be mechanisms, where the towers are known to be vulnerable, where the dream itself is known to be a system that can be broken. And that knowledge changes everything. Before the Dwemer, the gods were unquestionable. The Albis was sacred. The dream was eternal. After the Dwemer, nothing is certain. The gods can be challenged. The Albis can be manipulated. The dream can end. This is the Dwemer's legacy, not the ruins they left behind, not the artifacts scattered across Tamriel. But the knowledge that reality is not fixed, that the fundamental nature of existence is not settled, that the world can be changed if you understand the mechanism and are willing to pay the price. Kagrenac stood before the Heart of Lorkhan and made a choice. He chose proof over existence. He chose to be right over being alive. And in doing so, he changed Tamriel forever. The Dwemer are gone. But their argument continues. in the tribunal's rise and fall, in the Numidium's terrible walk across history, in the Thalmor's project to unmake the world, in every scholar who studies the ruins and wonders what the Dwemer knew, in every philosopher who asks whether the gods are real or just powerful entities subject to the same laws as everything else. The argument continues, and Tamriel is still living with the consequences. In the ruins of Arkhanthams, Kagrenac's mask sits on its pedestal, empty and silent. The Dwemer are gone. But the question they asked, can we escape the dream, echoes through the ages. And somewhere, in the throat of the world, another answer waits. Not an answer built on refusal and denial, but an answer built on understanding and harmony. The Greybeards guard a secret. The way of the voice, a form of tonal architecture that does not break reality, but speaks within it. That does not deny the dream, but participates in it. The Dwemer used tonal architecture to escape the dream, but what if there is a way to use it to understand the dream, to speak to it rather than shout it down, to find harmony rather than refusal? That is a different kind of proof, a different kind of answer, and it begins at the summit of the throat of the world, where the Greybeards teach those who are willing to listen. The Dwemer asked, can we escape the dream? The Greybeards ask, can we understand the dream? One question led to disappearance, the other might lead to enlightenment, but that is a story for another time. A story of the voice, of the Dragonborn, of the difference between breaking reality and speaking its language. A story of the throat of the world and the secrets it holds. The Dwemer chose disappearance over losing an argument. They proved they were right, and they paid the price. The question for the rest of Tamriel is, what will we choose? And what price are we willing to pay?